I keep hearing people talk about preparation. You need to be prepared for what's coming. You need to be prepared for the future, and you need to have a plan. But can somebody please explain to me which future exactly we're supposed to be preparing for? Because it seems to me that there are about 1.5 million different directions that this could all be headed, and nobody knows for sure where it's going. So are we supposed to be preparing for this utopia that we're all being promised in a couple years, where automation happens and everything becomes so efficient that we become a real life version of Wall-E, and we all just kick back and relax, we do whatever we want with our lives, and we all just collect a check? Nobody even has to work. Or are we supposed to be preparing for something a little less utopian and something a little more dystopian? Maybe automation replaces all of our jobs or takes all of our jobs, and maybe automation and AI, or these sentient beings that we're creating, replaces us. Or are we supposed to be preparing for the future where basically Terminator happens and there's a rise of these sentient beings, these artificial intelligence robots, all these cyborgs, and they just basically take over everything and we become slaves to the automation? Or are we supposed to be preparing for the future where all these rich billionaires go hide in their bunkers and they leave us out here to fend for ourselves, dealing with whatever catastrophe or Armageddon type scenario is about to ensue? Somebody please explain to me which future of these and many more we're supposed to be preparing for. I think this is the question of the century right here, because things right now are very, very fluid. They're very uncertain, but everybody can feel that our future is headed somewhere that is uncharted. And that makes a lot of us feel pretty uneasy. And let me know down in the comments below if you feel uneasy about this, but I know I'm not alone in feeling this way because I've heard other people talk about this. And I think really it's just in the back of everybody's mind, because how are we supposed to prepare for a future that may not even exist? And that right there, that is the $1 million question, because this whole idea of preparing for our future, it's nothing new. But I think this question has become much more profound in recent years, because back in the day, preparation was pretty simple. I mean, it basically revolved around, what are you going to do once you get out of school? Are you going to further your education? And or are you going to jump into a career and figure out what you want to do with your life? What are you going to be when you grow up? That was the gist of preparing for our future. I mean, there were other things to consider, but that's mostly what it revolved around. But today, that is not the case. There are many, many factors. I would say dozens of factors that we all have to consider, and many uncertain factors. And I've taken a lot of time to think about this, and I truly believe that the answer lies in the gray area. It is the somewhere in between, somewhere in that mixture of the dystopian nightmare and the utopia, and maybe even the Armageddon. And what that basically looks like is preparing for a future that might exist. And that could be a combination of all the futures that we could ever possibly imagine. And if we think about what that might look like in terms of lifestyle, I mean, let's just break it down piece by piece here, okay? So if we're preparing for an Armageddon scenario, maybe that means that we shouldn't give a crap about anything. Like, we really shouldn't care. Judgment, fear of judgment, comparison, trying to get all the stuff, trying to impress people, and really just caring about all the small petty stuff in life should not even be a factor at this point. Because when you're faced with a future that may not actually exist, and that could be a very real possibility, why would you care about anything? I think that really gives us the permission to just go out and do whatever the heck we want. If there's something you've been dreaming about doing, right now is the time to do it. I mean, if the future is going to look pretty bleak and there's not going to be anything there, live your best life. Do all the things in life that you want to do, because you may not have the chance to. Tomorrow might not be guaranteed, so you want to jump out of a plane and go skydiving? Now's the time. You want to start that business? Go for it. You want to ask that girl out or that guy out? What's holding you back? I mean, when you really think about it, when you're faced with nothingness and everything's just black, that really is the ultimate permission slip. And maybe that's where the silver lining comes in, is, looking at the bright side of this kind of stuff. Okay, maybe tomorrow's not guaranteed, but what can I do today? What can I do today to make sure that when I'm faced with that end of the road, I don't have any regrets? And maybe that's what it really boils down to when you tap into this aspect of it, is just not having any regrets. And I think facing that end of the world scenario also means getting your mind right and finding peace with things in your life. Because at the end of the day, if you're faced with the end, what's the point of holding grudges? What's the point of not forgiving? What's the point of not seeking forgiveness? And maybe that's the key thing here, is just finding that place in your heart where you can forgive and where you can seek forgiveness and find peace in your life. But what about preparing for something a little bit brighter, something like a utopia? How do we prepare for that? Well, I think this is where it's really, really easy, because in a lot of cases, I think maybe we just keep doing what we're doing. If everything's going to work out and we're all going to be in a couple years living in this utopian world where everything's just handed to us, again, I think that's kind of permission to just do what you want right now and not really spend endlessly, or maybe even not even live frugally, but just live your life as you normally would, knowing that in the future, everything is going to work out exactly the way it's meant to, and it's going to work out for the best. I mean, that's really more of an optimistic outlook, but that should give people a positive, uplifting vibe. And maybe it's just a matter of knowing that not everything's doom and gloom. It doesn't always have to be bad. And even in this scenario, I think it's going to pay to get our mind right and get it right now, because if this utopian future does in fact take place, that could also mean a lot of people are suddenly going to lose their sense of purpose. Because what do people do when they're just handed money? What do people do when they don't have to show up anywhere? Are they just going to sit around and play video games all day? Or are they going to retreat into this VR headset, this virtual world that they're creating? Is that going to be the gist of our lives? What do we do when we suddenly lose our sense of purpose? And that's where I think strong mental fortitude comes into play. And I think that's where it is going to pay to, right now, while we can, make that time for ourselves to actually get to know ourselves on a fundamental level and understand what makes us tick, and understand, or at least have some sort of an idea on what we feel our purpose is here in this world. Because when you're handed everything, where does your drive and ambition go? Do you even need drive and ambition? And if not, is it really possible that we could all actually be facing the idea of a real life Wall-E, where we just become so obese and so helpless that we become confined to wheelchairs or flying chairs, and we have this food paste in a milkshake jug that we just suck down all day? Is that our future? So I think this is where it's going to pay to tap into that mind right now and start thinking about this stuff, because that future is a possibility. But moving away from that, how do we then prepare for a world where cyborgs or AI or robots or whatever you want to call them basically replaces humans? And I think that encompasses both scenarios. It encompasses the actual replacement theory, where AI basically takes over everything and humans become slaves to the robots. And it encompasses AI taking our jobs away, and thus maybe our purpose and pretty much everything else. Well, I think this is probably another easy one, because I think this really just comes down to focusing on having a backup plan. If AI is going to take away our jobs, what else can you do with your life? And I'm talking in terms of, your hobbies and in terms of work. So if you just have a career kind of like I did, and you're stuck, basically your entire life doing one thing and that's all you know, it's probably going to pay right now to diversify your skill set. I mean, diversify yourself, because the more skills you know, the more knowledge you have, the more valuable you're going to become in a scenario where AI comes in and just takes everything away. And I think it's also going to pay equally, maybe even more so, to diversify your self-reliance. And what I mean by that is, if you only buy food in the grocery store, maybe you need to think about growing your own food, or find a local producer that you can source your food from. Maybe you need to start looking around and finding local springs in your area where you can source water in case water actually does become scarce, because we all know they're calling for a water shortage and a water crisis, which is probably going to happen. So that's going to pay to do that. It's going to pay to stockpile food. And, just in general, it's going to pay to be traditionally prepared. And traditionally prepared basically just means having the skill set and the knowledge to function outside of the conventional system. Being able to be self-reliant or at least have a community and a tribe around you, which is also very important and is something we should probably be doing in this scenario, building tribe, building community, but having that community where you can kind of rely on them for food, water, shelter, having a place where you can bug out to in case things get really, really bad. And oh, by the way, having skills and knowledge is also going to help in that situation, because when you have a tribe, you're going to need people from all walks of life. You're going to need all different kinds of skill sets, and you're going to need all different kinds of knowledge. So I think all these things are really going to help out in this scenario. And also, it probably is also going to pay to start a physical library of physical media. I'm talking books, CDs, DVDs, whatever you can get your hands on that is physical media that can't really be easily taken away, and that is going to help you weather the storm. And I think this is also very, very important to do right now, because we all know, or some of us know, that Anthropic, the AI company, is now buying up millions upon millions of old and rare books, and they are chopping the ends off and feeding those books page by page into a sophisticated scanner, and they're using those books to train their AI. And what do they do with the books once the books are done? They destroy them. So at this very moment, we are losing millions upon millions of books, and in some cases even rare books, to these AI models, which is kind of crazy to think about, because back in the 1930s, they used to call that book burning. But today, it's celebrated, it's glorified, and they make laws around it saying that it's okay. And it's not just Anthropic that's doing that, it's many of these AI companies, but that's a topic for another day. The moral of the story here is just setting yourself up to be as secure as possible for a future that is very uncertain. And while we're talking about security, it's probably also going to pay to be financially secure. So maybe that means in the interim, right now, just living frugally, saving money, maximizing your investments, and just trying to have as much of a cushion as you can possibly have, just in case your job does go away. And maybe there's a transition period between our jobs going away and that utopia that we're being promised. But in that transition period, you're going to need something to get you by. So again, right now it pays to think about that kind of stuff. And really, a lot of this also comes down to mental fortitude. Building your skill set, building your knowledge, that all comes down to the mind. Finding tribe and community and like-minded people, that's also a mindset. You have to be willing to go out and talk to people. You have to be willing to connect with people, which I think is very important right now, because right now we're in a time where people are very divided. So maybe a lot of this comes down to just having a mindset shift, thinking differently about the world and gaining a fresh and new perspective. Maybe that means getting out and joining local groups and communities. Maybe it means knocking on your neighbor's door and just saying hi to them, getting to know them. Regardless of the avenue you choose to go down, in a future that is borderline dystopian and run by AI robots, it is going to pay right now to build more genuine person-to-person connection. And when you lump all these things together, all these potential future outcomes and how we should prepare for each, and we find that middle ground, that gray area in between, I think what a lot of this really comes down to is mindset. And you'll probably notice that in all of these, I mentioned mindset as a forefront of the discussion, because I think that is very, very important. And it's one thing people overlook, because the most common advice that we're often given is how to prepare traditionally. Stockpiling food and water, building a bunker, all the physical stuff. But what is overlooked almost always, and is more important than all of that, is the mind. Because the mind is what dictates our reality. The mind is what is going to make or break any potential future that we could possibly have. And if you haven't learned how to find peace within yourself, if you haven't learned how to forgive or be forgiven, if you don't know how to face the peace and the silence and the solitude, and you don't know how to be alone because you can't stand what surfaces, the demons that surface when you're in that silence, that's going to be a very real problem. And as we are all now seemingly barreling towards this very uncertain future that may not even exist, the mind is the most powerful thing that is going to get us through it. And by focusing on this middle of the ground gray area and taking preparation aspects from all these different scenarios that could be possible, this is going to pay no matter what happens. Because the concepts here, not caring what people think about you, finding peace within yourself, building tribe, building community, learning how to be self-sufficient, building your skill set and your knowledge, creating a library of tangible assets that you can refer back to that nobody can take away. All of these things are going to be beneficial regardless of the situation. And they're going to be beneficial even in the situation we're in today. And by adopting these principles and making some of these changes, it doesn't even necessarily mean that we're preparing for the future. It just means that we're doing things that are going to benefit us, regardless of what the future may hold. So in that sense, it doesn't matter if the cyborgs take over and we become slaves. It doesn't matter if we're faced with Armageddon. And it doesn't even matter if we find ourselves in the ultimate utopia, because regardless of what the future holds, as long as our mind's in the right place, we will be prepared for it.